and traitorous kings, Osrith spat back. King Connell laughed. Then, he grabbed the back of her jerkin and marched her across the field, to a place where the fighting had ceased. Men were regrouping. Norse were huddling together by the gates of Eothwick, large numbers killed, which were now being taken from the battlefield. Nine Fingers, however, stepped over the dead, pushing Osrith further forward towards a group of men standing together. At once she recognized Aldhelm, who was standing beside her brother, and her brother's men. To the other, was her Merson men, and a faint glimmer of happiness sprang into her mind that they were not dead, and were with Aldhelm. It passed, however, when she remembered that Elfrith was dead. And before Uhtred was another man, similar in height and build and resemblance to Ragnall. Beside him, Stjora, and beside her, two children. I have Constantine's messenger. King Connell called to them. Ragnall told me to tell you that if you do not yield, Sigtryg, she will cause the sun to die, and curse the Norse and Mersons who oppose you. And I will have no choice but to tie her up and burn her for the witch she is. An uneasy silence fell. Everyone who was with Uhtred was staring at Osrith and Connell, and so it was that the sky began to cloud over. A rumble of thunder came from the west. Behind them, Osrith noticed, the four Gales that Ragnall had tasked with guarding her had followed their king and were standing behind them. A cry went up, a low yell, and a storm of blades and axes began to fight anew. It could only be Constantine's Mormers. But who was fighting with them? It wouldn't be long until everyone would begin to fight again. Osrith reasoned. Battles were like that, skirmishes would break out, and then huge battles would recommence so that everyone was fighting at once. Mormers. Osrith shouted over the noise in Gaelish. Do your worst. But there was no movement from any men close to Sigtryg. Indeed, one man did step forward, taking Sigtryg by the arm and leading him out into the center of the group. Men, Uhtred proclaimed. Norse, Northumbrians, Christians. This is your true king. He claims the land his forebears won, and he will tolerate all faiths in Eothwick. He had sworn to peace with Mercia and Wessex, and promises that lives can be lived in Northumbria. People can live in peace and prosperity. Uhtred held Sigtryg's arm again, leading him round the makeshift arena of men, paused in their fighting to listen to Uhtred. All hail King Sigtryg, Uhtred added, holding his son-in-law's hand high into the air. All hail King Sigtryg, came the reply. And besides Stjora, Osrith glimpsed the unmistakable form of Ethelstan. The battle is over. Sigtryg began, beginning his first speech as newly acclaimed King of Northumbria. And I say to all of you now, it is not over. From beside Osrith, Nine Fingers screamed reply. Ragnall, where are you? Men of the Norse, Gales. We fight on. And he was just about to pull Osrith towards him, when a reply came. Connell, it is not over. The voice came out of the cloud-gloomed landscape. It is not over, brother. It was Finan. It took a long time for Osrith to relate Finan to Connell, how much that it felt like a dream to her. If he were the brother of the man who had tortured her, on the beach at Doia. The man who had exceeded the Ullaid throne. Then he was the one who who had held her down while Nine Fingers had forced himself into her mouth. Had tied her to the sea rock. Had stood with his brother and watched the tide coming. No, Osrith screamed, as Connell pushed her aside. No. But Finan did not look at her as she backed into the Gaelish warriors to whom she had been speaking not 10 minutes before. Finan, married to Gormleth, she had borne her husband, the Ullaid prince, 2 sons. He had been the brother sold to slavery after running off with Nine Fingers' wife. Brathair Beag, Connell murmured. You live, too. His words were matter of fact. Cold. What, are the peasants at Warri going to spring out of the ground as well? They fought, as the Gaelish warriors stood beside Osrith, keeping her from running, keeping her close at hand. And she continued to watch as Finan's anger, greater ever than Osrith's could be, bettered his brother, and killed him, in front of his men, in front of Ragnall Levason, his sworn general, stabbed in the chest with his own sword. It was only then that Finan stared at Connell, before lifting Feather sword and trod the blood-soaked earth to Osrith. Yours, he said to her, nodding his head, his eyes on her face as hers were on his before thrusting the blade into the soil in front of Osrith's feet. Then he turned, and crossed back to where Uhtred was standing, beside the new king of Northumbria, without even a second glance to the corpse that was once his own brother. But all that was superseded because, over the ground, under the sword of the figure that looked to be Eswi, with the Mormers close beside him, was Ragnall. The brother of the new king of Eofuec struggled, but not for long. Sigtryggr offered for his brother to join him. Ragnall refused. And Sigtryggr refused Uhtred's offer to execute Ragnall of Usson, choosing instead to be the one to run him through. But he could not go through with it. Instead, Sigtryggr watched his brother flee Eofuec. Not a good day for brothers, mused Combe, not fully realizing the gravity of his statement. Osrith! Came a cry from across the battlefield, and Miral raced towards her, her mercenaries close behind him. You came, Osrith told him. You, and Eswi. We had men waiting, they did themselves, and Cumbraland, and Strathclyde proud. Owain led them, and, Owain? Osrith asked, in wonder, forgetting her hunger, her thirst, her tiredness, her instinct as a warrior in the foreground, wanting to hear the battle tales. Then, her face fell. We will find him, Osrith, Miral told her. Elfrith will not go unburied. And then he glanced over her shoulder at the four Gaels who were standing close to Osrith. They had me as hostage, Ragnall, King Connell. And she found it easier, much easier, to say his name with his body slumped on the battlefield not far away. An alliance with Anlaf, she added, in Gaelish, knowing that while Angus and Felim, who had joined Eswi and Miral, would understand, so would the four Gaels behind her. What will you do now? Osrith asked. Return to Don Shada, ask to be his guard again? We could, mused Celduin, reaching past Somoth and picking up Bué. What will you do with two swords? Fight twice as hard, Osrith told him, taking her sword that she had won at Dara. However, before she could continue, a shuffling sound was coming from the west. As she looked, Osrith saw that she was looking at men on horseback, and she followed the group until it became clear that it was Ethelfled. The lady of the mercenaries approached Sigtryggr and Uhtred, who were now organizing the cleanup of the battlefield, for metalwork to be collected, for graves to be dug, and was greeted by her title. She got down from her horse and surveyed the battlefield. Good that she turns up when it's all over, Osrith said, in Gaelish. And the allied Gaels laughed. She will likely give you land, she added, in English, and she asked Miral, and strode up to her. Ethelfled, with characteristic disdain, looked down on the weak and exhausted Osrith carrying both her swords. I hear you fought well, she told Osrith, who deliberately kept her eyes fixed on the woman, and not her brother, nor his men, nor Ethelstan, who was standing next to his aunt's horse, her boots indenting the blood-soaked earth. How many months of your debt have you repaid now, Osrith of Alba? 4, Osrith told her. If she was expecting thanks, she did not get it. Instead, Ethelfled dismounted, and looked about her. And now I ride north with a proposal that is of mutual benefit, Osrith continued. How dare you ignore me, she raged internally. Ethelfled was still perusing the battlefield, when she turned her head back to Osrith and continued to look at her with disdain. Oh, I know you propose an alliance between Constantine and Edward, that would be most amusing to you. No more amusing than that of Uhtred and Ethliad, or Eric. That touched a nerve. Osrith always remembered him as a gentle Northman. They had been imprisoned together at Cumbraland. He had died trying to flee Beamflout with Ethelfled, Siegfried killing him before Himselt. Ibg killed until a battle with the West Saxons. You know nothing of Eric, Ethelfled hissed, and raised a hand. Osrith thought she was going to strike her. Maybe it was the two swords. She felt bold, cocky, and didn't care what her words did. Elfrith was dead. Nine Fingers had taken her again. And there was the lady, uncaring, arrogant. I fought next to him, once, as he invaded Scotland. If she didn't know that, Osrith thought, grimly, she did now. I freed him from a prison cell we were both in. She touched her hair, finding the jewel that Eric had given to her. He gave me this, and I used it to escape our prison at Caerligwylid. A crowd was gathering, but Osrith did not care. It was the first time told anyone of that. So, I know a deal about Eric Thurgilson, Osrith concluded. And yes, if you wish an Anglarland, Edward should strike a bargain, and Mercia should feign blindness to its annexation. How dare you try to? Ethelflaed's anger was now undisguised, and she stood in her stirrups and raised her riding crop. I did, Lady of the Mersons, Osrith pointed out, refusing to allow herself to be intimidated. I always thought the Mersons would have done better. Your father never did allow their royal house to return, did he? You have time left, to serve Mercia. Ethelflaed seemed to have regained her composure, and was now issuing orders. I command you to protect my daughter Elflad. Command me? Asked Osrith scornfully. I ask you, for the love you bear your daughter, Pika and Thyra's daughter, protect mine. She is the future of Mercia. And there was the humility of a proud woman, Osrith thought. No wonder all the Mersons loved her, followed her, willingly died for her. But Osrith was not one of them. She shrugged. I will do what I can. You are leaving? Ethelflaed exclaimed, truly bewildered by a reality that she didn't believe was possible. And now to Osrith it seemed she believed something specific about her service to Mercia. You never specified that I must serve my 2 years at once. So, when I serve Mercia again, I will protect Elfwin. You have plenty of others who will do this. Not Elfrith, one of your most loyal, or you lady, though you play at soldiery. And that was it. There was the provocation. Enough for Lady Ethelflaed to jump from her steed and stand on the ground, sword out of her scabbard in seconds. Fight me, Ethelflaed demanded. Osrith said nothing. Fight me, Ethelflaed demanded again. Around them, whispers and titters of laughter came from all around them, on a battlefield that was the foreground of the Eoforwick. But Osrith turned away. Osrith only knew of Ethelflaed's attempt on her life when, as boots squelched in the mud, Osrith turned back to see Eutyd's hand lowering the lady's arm. I will not be responsible for dismantling your father's work, Osrith told Ethelflaed. But then a chant began, a chant of her name, only, Osrith, Osrith, and Osrith left, walking north, in the direction of Alba. From many directions over the battlefield came men, her Mersons, the Mormers, Owain, too, and the Strathclyde and Cumbrian men, who had answered Mercia's call. She had just turned to say something to Miral, about horses and provisions, when another man who had been following her. It was Finan. She stopped when she saw him, some distance from her warriors, and Finan advanced slowly. Osrith, Finan began. There is nothing to explain, Osrith told him. You are not the same man who held me down on the beach at Doiaya, nor tied me to a rock to let me drown. You are. And her warriors, who were watching, saw Finan take Osrith in his arms and kiss her, hard and for a very long time. I will come for you, Osrith, he promised, when we have Bibbenberg. It was a compromise, for Finan, a big compromise. But that didn't stop the being Senate, and her marriage to him, and Edra and Finan Beak. There was nothing more to say, but there was more to be done. Miral, with Egelfrith, Oshir, Elfkin and Falkbald, crossed the field with horses and food for her and the Mormers. Whether they were their original ones, Osrith did not know. Finan called Eutyd, and the warrior turned, glancing at the body of his brother as he strode past it and to his lord. Beside him, Ethelistan and a huge blonde Norseman, Bergskål Grimson, whose life he had saved on the beach at Tidjui. We will see you again, Miral told her. You have a year and 8 months to serve. You will see me any time Mercia needs me, Osrith promised. It is safe, for now, but Don Shada may well not see it safe in the future, if Norse are allowed to collect on the shores of Irian again. If that's where Agnol ends up going. Why is it she is always riding away? Finan asked Sihtric, who looked at his friend, with nothing to say. So what was it you did to her? Eutyd needled. Finan shook his head. Come on, Sihtric, Eutyd told Kjartan's son, we get Edith for our lord. And you, baby monk, help me bury my kin. But Sihtric didn't move. Instead, he pointed to the north. Osrith was riding back towards Eoforwick, and she was not alone. And she was surprised to see her nephew in the company of Eutyd's men, who had come all the way from Seastra at speed. Good, she thought, it would be good for Father Oswald to hear what she had to say. Brother, Osrith said to Uhtred, and got down from her horse. When I left Bibbenberg, I took this with me. It was our father's, she told him, holding out Fed a sword to him. I spent months, years looking for you, to bring it to you. I searched and searched for you, and had it taken from me. It is yours. And into Uhtred's unguarded hand, Osrith placed the prized sword, the one belonging to their father, also Uhtred of Bibbenberg. Uhtred looked at it. What do I want with this? Uhtred asked, scornfully, before throwing it back towards Osrith. She felt pain in her chest, but stooped to pick it up anyway, looking over its sinews and contours, thinking of the times she had dreamed of seeing it again. I think it is a marvelous sword. Osrith looked up to see that, beside King Sigtryggr, her nephew was smiling at her. And then she did something she swore she would never do. She put it into the hands of someone who was not Uhtred. But, of course, he was. He was Uhtred, Uhtred's firstborn son. It must be kept with the male bloodline, Osrith told him. And her nephew smiled at her. Then I will, aunt, he told her, before leaning over and embracing her. Then, Osrith turned to Sigtryggr. I know you will advance north, she told her nephew-in-law. But do not go to Cumbraland, that country is mine. Sigtryggr could be forgiven for being taken aback. Mine as widow of King Guthred, and is his. She nodded up to Owain, who had come with her. I will speak to the king myself, Sigtryggr told her. He will come to the wall, Osrith confirmed. So, if you head directly north from here, you will get to Heavenfield. Constantine told me to tell you he will meet you there. But Sigtryggr was confused on one point, and wagged finger at Osrith, curiously. If Cumbraland is yours, you should know Uhtred has, just now, send his man Sihtric, who has taken men in pursuit of Ragnar. Understood, Osrith told him. We are to go to the wall, now, to Caerligwyled, to return the men who were lent here. This is where Ragnar headed, he conceded. And then took Osrith's hand in his, and shook it for a moment. It is a pleasure to meet you once more, Osrith of Alba, that you survived childbirth, that your son is well. Your children too, Osrith replied, and then allowed him to help her back onto her horse. 88,888,888. Just before they crossed the River Eden, outside Caerligwyled, a week after leaving Eothwick, Osrith called her men to her. They had left Abbot Findel and King Dyfnwell's men at the city. Dyfnwell, who had welcomed them, especially his son, at Cumbraland's capital, was there to offer the city more defences. We just get men stand around by me, she asked, and they did, Felim, Engus and Owain, and also the 4 Gaels from Irian, who had decided to chance their luck with Constantine. What have we gained, Osrith? Asked Eswy, looking behind him. Northumbria spreading out in all directions. Bruises, she told him. We know while Mercia accepts the tripartite alliance, it does not respect Caerligwyled. We have secured a king in Northumbria who will think before he attacks Alba, if he does at all. We have gold for Constantine. This Osrith had liberated from Mus, who had not been as careful as she had thought on hiding Osrith's money. And Dyfnwell is defending what was once, although it won't be enough. For when Aethelstan comes north, which he will do, when he gains the Mercian and Wessex thrones. Is that what you will tell Constantine? We asked, when you give him the whore's gold and silver, that Dyfnwell needs to defend Caerligwyled? You have seen. It will take more than 4 men to ride south and add ourselves to the Mercians. There is a king in Eothwick now, a king of Northumbria. That king, technically, owns to the Tuide as you and I know. Constantine claims to the wall. And so, after eating, and washing in the Aedan, they took the route Eric had with Osrith, northeast to the birth of the River Forth, and over, to its northern bank, back to Alba.